for years, menopause, fertility periods, it's all been brushed under the rug. And I think brands are starting to realize that once they bring those conversations out into the open, that they can connect with their female consumers and just be a lot more trusted.
In an ever-changing world that's all about staying connected, building connections, and seeing where the next collaboration takes a marketing campaign. From an initial brief to the follow-through, what paths are going to make a campaign success more than a possibility? Hi, I'm Brett Marchand, CEO of Plus Company. This is Partners in Possibility. Today, we're talking about making the taboo untaboo. We're talking about perimenopause, menopause, and how the conversation is both changing and happening. 1 billion women around the world are in perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause, and it will impact half the population. My guests are Katie Jensen, Group Creative Director at Mekanism, and Lauren Redfern, Executive Director at Hormonally, a US-based nonprofit focusing on women's health. Katie is also co-author of Plus Company's Women's Health and Wellness Report. It's called Gaslighting, Gray Hair, and Gadgets. She'll talk about how brands have an opportunity to move into the conversation about women's health. And Lauren will talk to us about how women and men can change the narrative around hormones and get people more comfortable about these stages of life. I hope you'll find this conversation with Katie and Lauren as enlightening as I did. Well, welcome to the podcast, Katie and Lauren. Excited to have you. And it's going to be a super interesting topic, I think. Maybe before we dive into the study and your perspectives on what's going on in the world of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, I just thought I'd share my perspective a little bit, or my own experience at least with this, because I think talking about this is important. And I was saying to you guys earlier that my mother went through menopause when I lived at home, and I just didn't even we knew something was going on, but there was no discussion, no mention of it. I don't remember her ever talking to anyone else about it. So I'm not even sure, how she made it through, frankly. And then, my wife, who's in her 50s, her and her friends, of course, have gone through all of that. And there was much more discussion, but it was, it wasn't exactly something that was, at cocktail parties, although it was much more open. And I learned a lot more about it through her experience and her friend's experience. And now my daughter, who's 26, she's had a friend who's actually studied it as you have, Lauren, as part of her master's degree. And they it's out there in the open. They're discussing when it happens, who's it happened to, what's it mean, et cetera, and in 3 generations, it's just been a huge change, I think. Is that what you guys are seeing?
Definitely. And I think that's great to hear. And I think, one of the things that interests me about this topic is exactly that, how we are trying to untaboo it. And I think, it's interesting from my perspective as a woman not going through it yet. I do, I take workout classes where I hear friends talk about it and we joke about it. It was never something that my mom ever talked about, but now that I'm around women that are going through it, I start to go, oh, that's what was happening in my house when I was younger. It's that kind of thing. But, this generation now is just untabooing everything and we're talking about it more. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's what we're starting to bring forward a lot more. And that's kind of what connected me to Lauren, which has been great.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's really interesting to hear your perspective of it as well, Brett, and just how much more comfortable people are feeling talking about, because I don't even know if it's just menopause. I think it's bodies. And I think that's what's interesting as well, of maybe women feeling more comfortable and confident in talking about our bodies, our bodily processes as part of our health, not just, this sort of taboo area that we have to keep out of certain aspects of our lives, because it impacts our lives, it impacts everything that we do. So I think that's been nice.
Oh, it's such a major thing, an event. It's kind of crazy that it wasn't talked about for so long, no?
And I feel for your mother and that experience of not having that space to be able to actually talk about it, or feeling, I think we hear the phrase at Hormonally, a lot of suffering in silence. And I think that was the experience for lots of women. And I think it's kind of amazing that we're seeing even, starting to see that shift away from that experience.
Yeah. And I'm actually inspired by the younger generation too. The fact that they're talking about mental health, they're talking about their bodies, they're talking about everything. So this I can see being carried forward where menopause will be something that they talk about, and it won't be so scary, and they won't be doing it in silence. So it's amazing.
So Lauren, there's, I think, like a billion women that are globally either in perimenopause or menopause or postmenopausal. So tell us a little bit about what hormonally.org is doing to raise awareness and education and help women through these times.
Yeah, I love that. It's like crazy when you think about it in that scale, right? 1 billion people going through this. So to provide you with some background on Hormonally, so we're a nonprofit and we are dedicated to supporting people to really understand what's happening in their body hormonally through the life course. Because I think what we recognize is these different fluctuations that are happening at different periods of our lives have a huge impact on our work, on our personal lives, on everything that we do. So we are a digital health platform that provides evidence-based information to help women make informed decisions about their health. So I always give it the little tagline of the wiki how for your hormones. So we're really considering ourselves as a signposting resource that helps women learn more about themselves and know where to go to seek support. I think my own personal background, I think we talked about this previously. So my PhD was looking at women's experiences of navigating this space. And I think that the overarching thing that kept coming through was, I wish I'd known more about this earlier. I could have done something. Or it was this sort of feeling of, perimenopause, menopause came along and hit me like a train. And I didn't have any idea what was going on, because this taboo, this not talking about it, this not engaging meant that there was this sort of real scary thing that's happening in your body. And I think what we're trying to do is take the fear out of that and providing a safe and supportive environment for people to learn about this very normal period of life and how they can seek support and help. And I think the thing that we're focused on as well is looking at how menopause is a systemic full body process that affects every bodily system. So it's our brains, our hearts, our bones, they're all affected by hormones. And I think, when you have that depletion of estrogen at that time, when you're seeing that fluctuation happening, it has a big impact, not just on what we see of these, like, oh, it's just hot flashes. This is much more. This affects our well-being and our health in more complex ways. Yeah.
And Katie, we did a report, which I think you were the author of, called, I love the name, by the way, Gray Hair, Gaslighting, and Gadgets. I don't know if you came up with that name, but which is all about, women's health and wellness, and obviously dives into this area as well. So tell us a little bit about the report and why did you do it?
The reason why they brought me into this report and the reason I've been connected to Lauren was, we have a lot of women's health brands here at Mekanism, and it has become our power space. And additionally, because I'm a mom, that's deeply influenced how I look at these issues and trying to create a better world for my daughter. And I think specifically when it came to menopause, we did so much research and we realized that the US just doesn't do enough to support women going through menopause. And the UK, in fact, does a ton, as Lauren can attest to. But since the US doesn't do a lot, one thing we noticed is that, it's a conversation that's really not happening in the workplace. And so we decided to do something to change that. And really specifically, the ad industry doesn't do a lot. So knowing that the ad industry is really good with untabooing things, we really wanted to start there. So we created what we call the Menac Claus. And what the Menac Claus is 6 sentences, no periods. So it's a very simple to adopt workplace policy that, supports employees during this menopause transition. And we launched it at Mekanism on International Women's Day, and we gave a call to the ad industry to do the same. And it was very easy to actually integrate the Menac Claus into our benefits policy. We have a health insurance partner that we already had baked into our insurance. So it was easy to adopt. We just had to actually bring those benefits to life, listed in the Menac Claus, and then shine a light on them. So that's kind of brought me to that study of gray hair, gaslighting, and gadgets, and the reason that, you know, I'm trying to bring menopause to the forefront, but I think specifically menopause in the workplace has been a passion space for me.
I mean, you talked about the workplace, obviously. What about brands? What do you think the role of brands have with, when it comes to menopause and talking about women's health in this way?
I think removing the taboo. I think, you know, for years, menopause, fertility periods, it's all been brushed under the rug. And I think brands are starting to realize that once they bring those conversations out into the open, that they can connect with their female consumers and just be a lot more trusted. So, you know, a young female consumer might see a piece of content about menopause and not feel completely connected to it yet, but they might go, hey, that's interesting. And, you know, when it's time, they'll have that trusted connection to a brand, and maybe it just won't be as taboo.
Have you seen anything out there in the world that people should know about that you think is a good example of somebody, you know, dealing with the taboo?
Unfortunately, in the menopause space, not really. And I think this is a topic Lauren and I talk about a lot, and we're always brainstorming on how we can break out into this space. I think, you know, there has been breakout in places like breastfeeding and things like that. We did it with Freedom Mom, where it was really just, you know, focusing on that raw experience that moms go through, but it hasn't happened in the menopause space. So I hope to be the one to do it. And I really think that that'll be the next frontier.
Can I add something to that, Katie, as well? Because I think what's so interesting about what you did with Menac Claus, and that's how we obviously connected, as I was like, this initiative is amazing and it's great, is I think we often hear the statistics of over 30 symptoms of menopause, right? And we don't really think about that. We don't really think about what that means, if that's, you know, and to kind of go back to what I was saying of it being, you know, a whole body systemic issue, I think because of some of the taboo, but also menopause can be really problematically comically represented in the media. You know, this is what menopause is. And actually menopause is, if it is over 30 symptoms, that's a lot of different parts of your body or your experience that are affected. So one of the things I was thinking about is how brands support this problem in a wider way. So as opposed to going for this low-hanging fruit of another supplement that's supposed to help with you know, something where it doesn't, you know, what about support for mental health? What about, you know, this experience that women will have at that period of time of changes to their well-being, changes to their mental health? You know, there's so much opportunity there to sort of create support that is looking at this as a systemic issue that also affects you in multiple ways in your life.
And Hormonally is bridging the gap, both from an, you know, from an education standpoint with women, obviously, presumably for their families, et cetera, but also for healthcare providers, right? Because, I mean, Katie, you mentioned that the UK is much further ahead, but I think the stat I read is that only 30% of US medical residency programs actually offer any kind of formal menopause curriculum. So is that, I mean, kind of shocking if you think about it, given, as you say, half the population is going to go through it.
Yeah, so we are a US based nonprofit. I just happen to be from the UK, and I think, but that's been really interesting for me to have that experience of coming from one space to another. But I find that it's a really fascinating point, and I think quite a complex one too, because I think healthcare providers can't support women if they're not provided with adequate training. Or information. And from the conversations I've had with early career professionals, I think it's been really clear that their learning about menopause is either a subtopic or a topic within a topic. And if they have learned about this, it's usually because they've sought out that learning themselves, as opposed to it being incorporated in a substantial way into the curriculum. And I think despite improvements, most of those conversations I've had, there's been a definite reflection that it's a focus on contraindications. So how HRT will increase your risk of cancer or thromboembolism. And I think what happens is, quite rightly, that still creates a space of menopause and hormones as scary. And I think for clinicians and providers, working against that narrative isn't always easy. So I think we have a huge amount that we need to do to also support our providers to mean that they're getting that teaching in a comprehensive way, so they know how to support women. Because yeah, I feel women deserve better and they need a source of reliable information and evidence, but that's not always easy if their providers aren't getting that information as well. So one of the hopes that we have is to try and raise awareness for that need for better provider education and campaign for those changes to be adopted in residency programs, and have a menopause curriculum that's provided in a comprehensive but also like practically focused way. How do you get that support?
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I mean, the one place that I think are seeing some initiatives, which is with celebrities, right? There's a bunch of them out there: Gwyneth Paltrow, Drew Barrymore, I think Cameron Diaz, et cetera, who have been investing in menopausal related products and brands.
Yeah, I mean, I think celebrity backed menopause brands are definitely helping to destigmatize menopause. They're normalizing conversations around it. You have Naomi Watts, Halle Berry, Judy Greer, Drew Barrymore. Like, they're openly discussing their experiences, their embarrassments, and it that itself helps reduce the shame and embarrassment that women may feel around the topic. I think, it's a good way to bring awareness and education, to get people just looking for help and support, and also just to laugh about it. Like, I think people can breathe a sigh of relief that, hey, if Drew Barrymore is going through this, maybe I can laugh about it and actually talk about it too. I think the only thing that, like, there is a risk that it oversimplifies menopause a little bit. It makes a little bit more of a trend than an actual conversation about something that real women are going through. So I think that's something that gets a little tricky, that a lot of these celebrities might not have that medical expertise, but I think the positive outweighs the negative, when it comes to these celebrity brands. It's getting people talking about it, and that's the biggest thing.
I think our report showed that like 73% of women actually don't even treat their symptoms. So if these celebrities
Yeah.
talk about it, if nothing else, if they ask their physician, even if 30% of them are only trained, but and actually do something about it, I think that's a positive thing, right?
Another thing I've been thinking about is, like, the only other risk with these celebrities is it doesn't always represent that, like, diverse background experiences of so many different women from different backgrounds have gone through. And I know Lauren definitely has a lot of opinions on this, which I found really, really fascinating. So, Lauren, I don't know if you want to build on that.
It's a double-edged sword, and I think it's also really important to recognize, as you sort of say, Brett, that this is amazing that people are talking about this and we are having a conversation about it, and it is bringing it out into the open more. But I think it's who is it bringing it out into the open for? Who is invited to that conversation? Who is able to take part in that conversation? And one of the things we see quite often, on our platform, is we get questions from women that sort of say, I live in this very rural, remote part of North Carolina. I can't access HRT, or my clinician doesn't know how to prescribe. I have to drive 2 hours to this specialist, and even then it's not covered by insurance. And so I think for us, we're really focused in also saying the awareness raising piece is amazing, and that's wonderful that we're starting to have these conversations, but let's talk about access. Let's talk about those, like, vital baseline needs. Can we talk about being able to have a provider that knows how to address your symptoms? So I think that's my observation is it would be great to see more of a bridge with, I think we are seeing celebrities that are getting behind these campaigns, but I think there definitely needs to be a push on the policy level for how do we make this more of a conversation about this as essential healthcare that women really need access to.
Is there anyone out there that you think is doing this well?
I mean, I think Drew Barrymore, honestly, I love that she's just talking about it and joking about it, because to me, when you can bring humor to a situation, that makes people automatically feel comfortable. Anytime you can joke or laugh in a room, and I do this when I'm presenting creative, if I laugh at myself, and the jokes, it makes everyone in the room go, oh, it's okay to laugh. Okay, I like the work, and it's the same thing with Drew Barrymore being up on stage and having a hot flash in front of everyone. Everyone was talking about that. That was on every news outlet. So I find that much more fascinating than, Naomi Watts doing a brand that's targeted towards women going through menopause. So I think that's the way to break through. Just being real.
And Oprah as well. Like she started talking about it fairly early on, right? I mean, I think on her channel, etc. She's, I'm not sure she's getting a lot of credit for it, but I know she was one of one of the first to actually put it out there.
I think what Oprah did really well in that conversation as well was really bring clinicians into the fold. So I really loved, she was also providing an accessible point of information for women too. So I think she kind of met that need in a really nice way of actually being able to, I think she's a great bridger of conversations between people, right? Which was nice to see.
How do you think education is going to happen in the future? How do you see telemedicine helping with care around this? Because I think there's a lot to come, no? And a lot that's needed, frankly, for this shift.
Yeah. I mean, I personally think that we can say a lot about telemedicine and the issues, and there are issues there, right? Sometimes people do need to be going in to see a provider. But I think one of the things that COVID has shown us is that there are options here for remote care that are kind of amazing. And I think it shows huge promise for, the access piece for women with those access concerns. So being able to feel that telemedicine is able to maybe not solve every issue, but some of those issues that may have not even been on the agenda for that person previously. I think that we're seeing opportunities being opened up in the women's health space more generally through telemedicine, which I think I'm hearing a lot of criticism about it, but actually from an access piece, I think it shows huge promise for being able to reach the most rural communities where they may not have access to a specialist in that way. So I personally choose to be optimistic about what that space of telemedicine could offer in women's health generally, but specifically for menopause.
And Katie, do you see a lot of brands coming in the menopause related product area?
Not yet. I think, like I said, it's the next frontier, and I think it's what is going to be talked about next. And I really hope that brands start to break that taboo a little bit more. And I think there should be, a lot more diverse faces and stories. I think that's really where we can start to dive deeper. And I think knowing that menopause affects women of all ethnicities and body types and sexual orientation, that's where we can really start to dig deep. And I think that's where, featuring a range of ages that can really broaden inclusivity. And I think that's what brands can start to do. But I think as of right now, it is really a lot more work is needed. And I think to Lauren's point, I think we can do a lot of education, but we can do it in a way that feels playful, in a way that women can actually relate to. So I hope that's what's next to come.
Well, and there's a whole bunch of other areas besides treating the symptoms, right? I mean, whether, as you said, or Lauren said, there's mental health, there's how do you support people through their careers as they're, either perimenopausal or menopausal. There's, long-term wellness and health. The door could open to a whole bunch of categories of things that would be beneficial.
We always say you can't stop menopause from happening. Like you can't stop this from happening, but knowing what to expect can help you navigate it with more confidence. And I think it's about that, right? It's changing the conversation away from it being something to be afraid of or something to be the butt of a joke or something to be, because I think there's also that part of it where I have conversations with a lot of women who themselves would be advocates for others, but wouldn't feel comfortable opening up about what they're going through personally or how menopause has affected their lives. And I always find that interesting and think, well, why is that? And I think that's the piece that I'm always curious is I think as women, sometimes there's that concern that if we're vulnerable in that way, it leads us open to a certain level of criticism that, we don't want to have to deal with. And I think that they're amazing, I think seeing how period trackers have actually allowed so many women to take control of their health in a really positive way, where they may not even be able to change what's happening, but they feel more in control from knowing what to expect. I think that's the piece that I can see in this conversation that is maybe needed, is that kind of allyship and support for women going through that. And I think there's huge openings for ethical sort of brands and leaders to do great things with that, to help women feel more comfortable talking about what they're going through and not feel embarrassed or the taboo, to come back to the taboo point, as you said, Brett, not a cocktail party conversation, but maybe it could be.
And how does that impact what you do at Hormonally, Lauren? Like, is that because that evolution that you just talked about, I presume that's having an impact on how you think about the company?
I think we're trying. So our sort of our position is redefining what it means to be hormonal. So we're taking that, we're trying to reclaim that what used to be the kind of little bit of a toxic shorthand there of she's just a hormonal woman, or it's probably just hormones, and say, yeah, we're hormonal. Absolutely, we're hormonal. We're full of hormones. And I mean, I'm kind of if you hadn't guessed already, a bit of a nerd in that way of like, I'm obsessed with this because I think our hormonal health is incredible and it affects everything that we do, as human beings, and men and women. This isn't just a conversation about women. This is all of us. And if we can change that narrative to take out what we think about when we think about hormones and actually make this an empowering conversation, I think there's something really amazing that could happen in that to change the conversation. So that's what we're trying to do is, change the landscape a bit and get people more comfortable talking about this.
Yeah, because men are actually starting to talk about testosterone for the first time, at least in the circles that I'm in, and probably driven by the conversation around menopause, frankly, because often women talk about these things and men start to realize, well, maybe it's safe to discuss these things as well. So,
and often women will use testosterone as part of their treatment for perimenopause and menopause. So I think that's the other, like I always say, I use the analogy of like an airplane or a car, like just because you need more fuel for like one of them doesn't mean it's not essential for both. So, testosterone is an essential hormone for us as women. And I think that's often missed from conversations, or again, we have this association that this belongs to men and this belongs to women. But if we can change that and go, yeah, it's different in different portions. But I personally would say I'd love to see more men involved in this conversation as well, because it impacts men's lives as well, right?
We hosted a town hall where Lauren came and answered a lot of questions, and a lot of the questions came from men. And I thought that was really great because those were also questions that women had too, but were maybe feeling like, oh, I should know that about my body, so I'm not going to ask it in a public space. But a lot of the guys felt comfortable and empowered enough to ask those kind of questions. And I thought it was really great. So I'm hoping that continues to change.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you both to make one prediction on the future of menopause and either products or brands or education. What are we going to see 5 years from now, 10 years from now that's going to be different than today?
I mean, this is probably me just manifesting, but I do think menopause is going to be untabooed. I think no one talked about periods, no one talked about tampons, no one talked about breastfeeding, and here we are, and everyone talks about it. And I do think that will be a big shift, and I think brands are going to start to get in on the conversation. So I think creativity-wise, we're going to start to see a lot of really great and interesting work in the space. And I hope we can start this conversation among women about menopause and just help women feel more seen.
Yeah, I would agree and echo everything that you've said, Katie. I also think one thing that I can see, or a prediction that I would have, I think there's going to be more conversations about the relationships with hormones generally and our overall health and well-being. So I think we're going to start to see, my hope is that we start to see providers and other people working in this space, engaging in those conversations about how we work together, how we support each other, and see this as like a very connected thing. Yeah.
Somebody will look back at this podcast 5 or 10 years from now and say, why did they need to discuss this?
Yeah.
Let's hope that's the case, right?
Yeah, exactly. And menopause benefits in every company, everywhere.
Well, listen, thank you for spending time with me discussing this important subject. Lauren, thank you for the work that you're doing at Hormonally and your research, et cetera. It's very important. And Katie, of course, thank you for the inputting into the research that we have done.
Absolutely.
And I think we'll give a link to everyone so that they can read the research itself, because I think it's super interesting. So, but I've really enjoyed this conversation, and hopefully this will lead to a whole bunch of other people having conversations like this. So thank you.
Thank you so much.